Current estimates report that upwards of 115,000 insurgents, organized into more than 1,500 individual factions, are participating in the Syrian war. Each of the 1,500 groups represents its own unique ambitions, ideologies, geographic holdings, and relationships with other actors. Some are purely fighting against Assad and his army, others to keep the dictator in power, and others still to balance against third-party organizations that are vying to take advantage of the anarchic conditions. Over the past 6 years, multiple coalitions have formed in fruitless attempts to unite the diverse opposition. Chapter 5 of the Syrian Civil War video series will discuss each of the most prominent of these coalitions, their member groups, and their respective roles in shaping the nature of the conflict from 2011 to present. To begin the analysis, we will start with President Bashar al-Assad. As Chapter 4 of this series explained, Assad began targeting protesters in 2011 who had been inspired by movements in Egypt, Tunisia, and Yemen, and who were calling for the president's removal. Denouncing any voices of dissent as terrorists, Assad sent his forces en masse to quell challengers, capture rioters, and eliminate all detectable threats to his power. Since then, Assad has received extensive support from two main international actors, Russia and Iran. The two states have provided Assad's forces with extensive military and strategic support, and have fought to ensure that he be given a place in the transitional government after a final peace settlement is reached. Assad is, however, severely lacking support from armed militia factions on the ground. One of the only armed groups fighting on his behalf is not even Syrian, but a Lebanese Shia Islamist group widely funded by Iran, Hezbollah. Hezbollah, or the Party of God, joined the Syrian conflict in June of 2013. The group considers the Syrian war not only an extension of their own war with Israel in 2006, but also as an existential threat to Shia Muslims throughout the Arab world. Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, declared the Syrian conflict Hezbollah's fight, and vowed to remain in Syria so long as international, regional, and jihadist opposition insurgents, specifically Ahrar al-Sham, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and select Free Syrian Army brigades, pose a threat to Assad's regime. Since intervening in 2013, Hezbollah's military wing has played a pivotal role in keeping the balance of power in Assad's favor. Supported by extensive funds and weapons donated by Iran and its Revolutionary Guards, the IRGC, the group has provided Assad's forces strategic and logistical advice, training, and fighters. Hezbollah has fought side by side with the Syrian army, and in some instances with Russian forces, in direct combat against opposition brigades. Their biggest success was arguably early in the war at the Battle of Al-Qasir. In June of 2013, thousands of Hezbollah fighters helped Assad's forces oust rebel brigades from the Al-Qasir region, forcing the Homs governorate to fall completely back under Ba'ath control. They again turned the tide for President Assad in July of 2016, when Hezbollah coordinated with Iranian and Iraqi militias to retake Aleppo. Involvement in Syria, however, has taken a severe toll on Hezbollah as a whole. Of the estimated 6,000 to 8,000 troops who Hezbollah has sent to fight in Syria, approximately 1,000 have been killed. This number includes several top leaders, such as Commander Mustafa Bedreddin, who was assassinated in April of 2016. Furthermore, Hezbollah's continued involvement in the war on behalf of President Assad has drastically undermined its reputation across the Arab world. As of spring 2016, the Gulf Cooperation Council, the Arab League, and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation have all designated the Lebanese group as a terrorist organization, whose military wing was already listed as a terrorist body by the EU in July of 2013 and by the United States in October of 1997. Despite these hits, Hezbollah has chosen to remain active in the conflict. Since entering the war, the group has received significant amounts of high-tech equipment from Iran and Russia, has expanded its tactical and strategic knowledge, and has been able to establish a formidable base within Al-Qasir near the Lebanese-Syrian border. In addition to the opposition brigades Ahrar al-Sham, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and the Free Syrian Army, Hezbollah has spent much of its efforts on another major target, the Islamic State. The Islamic State's involvement in Syria began in April of 2013. At this time, the Islamic State in Iraq, ISI, changed its name to ISIS, or ISIL. The group did so to include the Levant or Greater Syria within its self-declared Islamic Caliphate. This move consequently led to an increase in the Sunni Salafi jihadist organization's involvement and operations to gain territory in Syria. The group again changed its name on June 9, 2014 to simply IS, or the Islamic State. At this point, the group believed that they had effectively established a global Islamic Caliphate, with Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi as its caliph. Since then, IS has continued operations within Syria to protect its territorial holdings, conquer new territory, and establish their interpretation of Sharia law throughout the region. Currently, IS is concentrated in northern and central Syria. However, in pursuance of their global caliphate, the organization is constantly striving to gain additional land and expand their influence outward. In the war's earliest stages, IS led ambush-like attacks to do so. In 2014, however, the U.S. began launching airstrikes to limit IS's mobility and to destroy their controlled oil refineries. This drastically reduced the group's resources and forced it to evolve its tactics. From then onward, IS has continued its operations by working in smaller units and by using sleeper cells to launch surprise conquests on targeted communities. Although IS lost approximately 40% of its geographic holdings in Syria and Iraq since early 2015, the group still controls about 23,300 square miles across Syria. This includes two major cities, ancient Palmyra that temporarily fell back under Assad's control in March of 2016, and Raqqa, the self-proclaimed capital of IS. Once IS seizes control of an area, the group then begins to capture all municipal buildings and major infrastructure as a means to control the vital resources within a region. At this point, the group begins to impose its interpretation of Sharia law onto its quote-unquote citizens. These geographic holdings and citizens account for a significant amount of IS's resource base. IS seizes control of all materials in its conquered communities and imposes taxes and extortions onto all those under its reign. Furthermore, IS has been very successful in seizing several oil refineries as a way to fund their operations. The group also accrues funds through kidnappings and ransom, various crimes, and donations from both its members and international sympathizers. In this way, IS has become almost fully self-sufficient, compensating for its lack of support from hardly any local, regional, or international groups. There was a time in the war's early stages, however, when IS did receive support from allies on the ground in Syria. These limited relationships, mainly with al-Qaeda, Iran, al-Nusra, and Harar al-Sham, have all since deteriorated due to IS's extreme tactics and interpretation of Sharia law. In 2014, AQ formally disavowed the group, and in the same year, Iran chose to both close its funding program for IS and to join the US's campaign against the terrorist organization. Likewise, though the groups have successfully coordinated offenses together in the past, Harar al-Sham and al-Nusra ended their amicable relationship with IS in 2014 and 2015, respectively. Since then, the two rebel groups have been very effective in weakening IS forces within Syria through multiple coordinated operations. In this way, the Islamic State is fighting on almost every front possible, withstanding relentless attacks from Assad's forces, international campaigns, most notably led by the US and Russia, Hezbollah, extremist opposition groups, and US-sponsored rebel brigades. The Syrian opposition is commonly separated into extremist and moderate brigades. These militias are either fighting Assad, a third-party group such as Hezbollah or IS, or other rebel forces. Each of the individual 1,500 groups fighting represents unique ideologies, goals, tactics, and consequently, allies and enemies to be detailed later in this chapter. Past efforts to unify the disparate groups have for the most part proven widely ineffective. Many of the temporary umbrella organizations are either absorbed by stronger factions or dissolved due to infighting between members. Though two major past conferences, the Geneva Communique in 2012 and the Geneva II conferences in 2015, both adjourned with plans for multilateral ceasefires and the cessation of all violence against citizens that were never implemented, the more recent Riyadh conferences in Saudi Arabia showed hope for future progress. On December 10, 2015, 100 delegates, 15 representing armed Syrian opposition groups, met in Riyadh to discuss plans for peace. The conference was seen as the first major broad attempt to unify the Syrian opposition, and ended with several groups agreeing to negotiate with Assad in the future, so long as he wasn't given a place in the transitional government. One of the main umbrella organizations fighting on the ground in Syria is the Syrian Democratic Forces. The faction was formed in October 2015 in a merger between U.S.-supported Kurdish forces and smaller, non-Kurdish brigades. The Syrian Democratic Forces have been a formidable challenge to IS fighters in northern Syria and are considered to be one of the U.S.'s closest allies in the conflict. More recently, the group has even begun to receive support from Russia, who hopes to strengthen the SDF's current operation to retake the city of Raqqa. Within the Syrian Democratic Forces are two main subfactions, the Syrian Arab Coalition and the Kurdish People's Protection Units, or the YPG. The Syrian Arab Coalition is a group of two main brigades largely concentrated in northern Syria. The first is Jaish al-Thawar, or the Army of Revolutionaries, which has led offensives against both Assad and IS forces. The second member brigade, Jaish al-Sanadid, or the Forces of the Brave, have only targeted the Islamic State and remains neutral towards the president's regime. On the other side of the Syrian Arab coalition are the Kurds. The Kurds are also concentrated in northern Syria and within the Rojava area. Like Jaish al-Sanadid, the Kurds consider themselves to be the third narrative in the conflict and are primarily fighting IS while staying neutral towards the Assad regime. The main organization representing the Kurds in Syria is commonly referred to as the People's Protection Units, or the YPG. The YPG is a democratic socialist organization formed by the Kurdish Democratic Union Party, the PYD, in 2004 after the Qamishli uprisings. The Syrian-based PYD has offered continued support to the YPG, as has Turkey's Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK. In this regard, however, the YPG has developed a tension-ridden relationship with Turkey, who officially denounced the YPG as a terrorist organization in 2015, and has since been outwardly hesitant to support any operations involving the group during the conflict. Even without Turkish support, the YPG, as well as all female forces, the Women's Protection Units, the YPJ, has been highly effective in combating IS in northern Syria. The group has launched multiple small-scale offensives that depend heavily on stealth, guerrilla tactics, and an in-depth knowledge of the terrain to pick away at IS bands. The YPG has also participated in several larger-scale missions, often with the involvement of other umbrella opposition organizations. In 2014, the YPG successfully coordinated with the Kurdish Peshmerga to defeat IS for the city of Kobane. The group has also worked with the FSA to both combat IS and to facilitate the safe movement of refugees out of northern Syria. Currently, the Syrian Democratic Forces are engaged in an operation they launched in November 2016 to retake the town of Raqqa from IS control. If successful, this battle could be decisive in shaping the fight against IS both domestically and internationally. By seizing the self-proclaimed IS capital, the Islamist organization's ability to regroup and launch future attacks within and outside of Syria would be drastically handicapped. Another front receiving support from both the U.S. and the greater international community is the Syrian opposition. This umbrella organization includes two major factions, the National Coalition of Syrian Revolutionary and Opposition Forces, the Syrian National Coalition, or the SNC, and the Free Syrian Army, the FSA. The SNC has been one of the few opposition alliances to survive since its creation on November 8, 2012. Following 3 days of intense discussions between representatives of the major rebel groups, international political figures, and the Syrian National Council, the Syrian National Coalition was formed as a means to present the world with a more unified and coherent anti-Assad front. On the group's official website, the SNC states that their mission to overthrow Assad is guided by three core principles: inclusivity, accountability, and consensus. Guided by these three values, the SNC then lists several of its short and long-term goals, the most senior being to remove Assad and implement a representative transitional government in his place. Participation in the coalition is open to everyone who's committed to the realization of a democratic Syria, and currently includes Sunni, Shia, Alawite, Druze, Kurdish, Assyrian, Armenian, and Circassian participants. The group has its headquarters in Cairo, Egypt, as well as multiple offices in France, Germany, Qatar, Turkey, the UK, and the US. Its 114-member parliament is headed by the group's president, Ahmed al-Jarba, two vice presidents, Sahir al-Atasi and Mohammed Taylor, and Secretary General Badr Jarmones. The network is further organized by a series of subcommittees. The SNC's most significant branches include the Supreme Military Council, the Syrian National Council, the Democratic Bloc, the Revolutionary Movement, the Syrian Revolution General Commission, the Local Coordination Commission of Syria, the Local Administrative Council of Syria, and the Free Syrian Army. Almost immediately after its creation, the SNC was formally recognized as the legitimate representative of the Syrian people by 120 countries and organizations, including the European Union, the Arab League, the Gulf Cooperation Council, and the United States.
I'd like to talk about Syria. Do you plan to recognize the opposition and give them some legitimacy?
We've made a decision that the Syrian opposition coalition is now inclusive enough, is reflective and representative enough of the Syrian population that we consider them the legitimate representative of the Syrian people in opposition to the Assad regime, and so we will provide them recognition, and obviously with that recognition comes responsibilities on the part of that coalition.
That's a big step.
It is a big step. There is a small element of those who oppose the Assad regime that are in fact affiliated with Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and we have designated them, al-Nusra, as a terrorist organization. And we are going to make clear to distinguish between those elements of the opposition.
The group is less popular, however, among Syria's more extremist anti-Assad rebel groups. To date, 11 Islamist forces have denounced the SNC's authority and are calling for a counter-coalition under an Islamic framework to balance against the Syrian National Council's domestic and international power. The second major component of the Syrian opposition, and perhaps the SNC's most influential member, is the Free Syrian Army. The FSA was formed on July 29, 2011, by dissenting commanders of Assad's army and was the first Syrian rebel or opposition group in the war. Its main goals have been to protect peaceful protesters from the Syrian army, to serve as a unifying force amongst the opposition, and to ultimately remove Assad completely from power. Provided as a propaganda video published by the group's YouTube account affirming this mission. Historically, the FSA has led mostly guerrilla-style attacks to spread Assad's forces thin throughout Syria. Recently, however, the group has shifted its offensive focus onto less populated areas, with an emphasis on attacking the Syrian army's morale and attracting more deserters. As a major aspect of the SNC, the FSA has many of the same international sponsors, including Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UK, and the US. Though the U.S. supplies the FSA with salaries, light arms and ammunition, and limited amounts of missiles, they continue to criticize the FSA for its lack of ability to control the activities of its member groups. The FSA has tried to improve its organizational capabilities through its extension, the Syrian Military Council. The SMC is a group of 30 representatives, 6 for each of the respective fronts within Syria recognized by the FSA. Brigades that choose to join the FSA umbrella organization maintain their own identities and operations, and use the affiliation more for the title than for strategic gain. Such armed affiliates include the Martyrs of Syria, the Northern Storm Brigade, and Ahrar Suria. The Syrian Democratic Forces, the National Coalition of Syrian Revolutionary and Opposition Forces, and the Free Syrian Army are considered moderate groups by the United States and by the international community at large. There is a wide consensus, however, that the more extremist brigades that do not receive support from the U.S. or any major Western power have been the most effective at weakening IS and President Assad's forces. The two extremist brigades discussed in this project are Ahrar al-Sham and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, formerly the al-Nusra Front. These two groups are both Sunni Salafi jihadists and together co-created the umbrella organization Jaish al-Fatah, after Ahrar al-Sham absorbed the Sakor al-Sham brigade in 2015. Ahrar al-Sham has played a major role in shaping the opposition against Assad and his soldiers. To date, the group has formed and been a member of 3 umbrella organizations, in addition to Jaish al-Fatah. In 2013, Ahrar al-Sham founded the Syrian Islamic Front. This group was short-lived, however, and dissolved in the same year due to infighting between members. As a replacement, Ahrar al-Sham then worked with 6 other brigades to form the Islamic Front. At its peak, the Islamic Front had between 40,000 and 70,000 fighters. However, it too dissolved a year later due to internal conflicts between Ahrar al-Sham and Jaish al-Islam. After the creation of Jaish al-Fatah in 2015, a former Ahrar al-Sham leader formed Jaish Haleb, to which Ahrar al-Sham is currently a member. In addition to Ahrar al-Sham, Jaish Haleb includes 5 FSA brigades: the 101st Division, the 1st Regiment, the Mountain Falcons Brigade, the Sultan Murad Division, and Harakat Nur al-Din al-Zenki. However, the group does not include Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Ahrar al-Sham's closest ally in Syria. Though the two often coordinate against both IS and Assad's forces, there is some tension between Ahrar al-Sham and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Whereas Ahrar al-Sham's goal is to re-empower Islam by establishing an Islamic caliphate under Sharia law in Syria, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham seeks to establish a global caliphate, with Syria as a jumping-off point. In January 2016, Ahrar al-Sham refused to merge with Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and has often criticized the group's global jihadist aims as detrimental to the Syrian cause. In addition to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Ahrar al-Sham has coordinated past efforts to fight Assad with the FSA, and, more limitedly, al-Qaeda. Internationally, the brigade has received money and weapons from Qatar since 2014 and from Turkey since 2015. The group was the first rebel brigade to use IEDs in the conflict, and has often used these missiles to attack Syrian military arsenals for supplies. As Ahrar al-Sham's resource base expanded, so too did their ability to launch large-scale operations. These operations have targeted the Syrian army, Hezbollah, select Kurdish brigades, Alawite citizens, and, more recently, the Islamic State. In the early stages of the conflict, IS and Ahrar al-Sham would often join forces against Assad's men. However, in 2014, Ahrar al-Sham's leadership condemned IS for rejecting reconciliation efforts between Syrian Sunni rebel groups and for labeling all jihadists who hadn't joined IS as infidels. The group currently holds territory throughout Syria and often does extensive work to both support and improve the communities it controls. Ahrar al-Sham provides several public services to its territories, such as by operating water pump stations, maintaining dams, and using its own repair team to lead projects aimed at strengthening local infrastructure. Furthermore, through its own relief offices, the group often assists and coordinates with humanitarian missions to aid those living under its authority. As mentioned earlier, Ahrar al-Sham's closest ally, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, is also a Sunni Salafi jihadist organization. Like Ahrar al-Sham, they too hope to establish an Islamic caliphate in Syria ruled by Sharia law. Unlike Ahrar al-Sham, however, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham's horizons reach far beyond Syria's borders, as they hope to use Syria as a springboard into other states. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham began as an al-Qaeda affiliate. On December 23, 2011, the group at that time operating under the name Jabhat al-Nusra was deployed by AQI into Syria to establish sleeper cells throughout the region. Al-Nusra didn't formally declare its presence in Syria until the next year, however, after executing a suicide bomb mission against Damascus military intelligence facilities. This primary attack set the precedent for most of the group's subsequent offenses. The majority of al-Nusra's attacks against government forces over the following months often took the form of small-scale suicide missions or car bombings. As al-Nusra's membership grew, the group eventually could launch larger-scale and more conventional operations, such as targeting regime-held airports, checkpoints, and establishing no-fly zones with anti-aircraft weaponry. The group's resource base likewise grew collaterally with its membership. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham supplements what it receives from members with donations from international sympathizers, many from Kuwait, profits from lucrative oil fields and Syrian military equipment that the group seizes, ransom payments from kidnappings, which typically make between $4 and $25 million per subject, weapons purchased from Iraqi arms dealers, and weapons captured from American-backed rebel groups. Such was the case on July 31, 2015, when al-Nusra launched a strong offensive against U.S.-trained and equipped Division 30. In an effort to gain more local and international support, al-Nusra officially separated from al-Qaeda on January 28, 2016, and rebranded itself under the name Jabhat al-Fatah. The group renamed itself again in early January 2017 to its current label, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or the Assembly for the Liberation of Syria, after absorbing several smaller brigades. Currently, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham holds territory in 11 of Syria's 13 governorates. In addition to U.S.-backed rebel groups, the brigade focuses its offenses on Assad's forces, IS, Hezbollah, and other pro-Assad forces. Clearly, these militia factions have drastically shaped the nature of this civil war. Key umbrella organizations have added a limited degree of cohesion amongst the opposition front against Assad, making negotiations between parties a more effective pathway towards peace. However, goals for the conflict's outcome are widely split. Whereas the newly recognized representative of the Syrian people, the SNC, asserts a democratic vision for Syria's future, powerful Islamist brigades such as Ahrar al-Sham and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham are adamantly focused on establishing an Islamic caliphate ruled by Sharia law in Syria. To complicate matters more, President Bashar al-Assad shows little interest in abandoning his office, and has received continued international support from both Iran and Russia. In the approaching months, the international community in general, but the United States in particular, will play a vital role in catalyzing diplomatic negotiations between all parties, including representatives to groups largely considered extremist by the West. In order for a final peace agreement to survive the tumultuous post-conflict period, it must be reached by all Syrians, for all Syrians, and not reflect the personal ambitions of an outside nation.